Thank you very much. Honorable External Affairs Minister, Director Dr. Shailesh Naik. Let me first join the Director in welcoming the Honorable Minister here and expressing our very warm appreciation for being with us here today to interact with the young and enthusiastic scholars and researchers of international relations, of conflict studies and national security that we have here. As was mentioned in the introduction and as the Director said as well, we have here, Minister, scholars and faculty not only from NIAS, but also from a number of colleges and universities in Bangalore and with collaboration from outside Bangalore as well. Puducherry and Goa has been named as well. And I would say that in the last few years, there has been a real upsurge of interest in these subjects among scholars and students, not only in Bangalore, but I think broadly in the South as well. And I think NIAS has done a wonderful job in catalyzing this process including by its initiative of the International Studies Network, which the Director mentioned. I think, Honorable Minister, your interaction will definitely inspire a much broader interest and a more in-depth understanding of how the issues that the scholars and researchers study actually look to the policy maker in the field. And it's the policy maker who sees developments around him and has to fashion responses to further the national interest. And I think this is where the gap shows up between the theory of international relations and the practice of international relations. The Minister today will be speaking on 8 years of national security. Naturally, these are the years of the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Dr. Jaishankar has been intimately involved in this journey, first as Foreign Secretary and then as External Affairs Minister. Also a word about his subject today, national security. I think it draws attention to something that is not often realized in day-to-day life, how much the external environment and external developments impact on our national security and how much of our foreign policy is actually devoted to the defense and furtherance of our national security. So with these few words, I would like to invite the Minister to make his remarks. He has indicated that he will start with some remarks on the subject that we talked about, and then he will kindly take questions from the floor. So, Honorable Minister, most welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Raghavan, for your. Now I have a very pleasant duty to introduce today's our chief guest, Dr. Jaishankar. As you know, he's India's External Affairs Minister since 2019. He's a member of the Upper House, Rajya Sabha, of the India's Parliament from Gujarat. He was the Foreign Secretary from 15 to 18. An ambassador to United States 2013 to 15, China 2009 to 13, and Czech Republic 2009 to 2014. He was the High Commissioner to Singapore 2007 to 2009. He has also served in other diplomatic assignments in embassies in Moscow, Colombo, Budapest, and Tokyo, as well as in the Ministry of External Affairs and President's Secretariat. He was also President, Global Corporate Affairs at Tata Sons Private Limited. Dr. Jaishankar is a graduate of St. Stephen College in University of Delhi. He has a Master's in Political Science and MPhil and PhD in International Relations from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. He is a recipient of the Padma Shri Award in 2019 and has written widely acclaimed best-selling book, The India Way, Strategies for an Uncertain World, which was published in 2020. With these few remarks, I would now request Dr. Jaishankar, Honorable Minister, to make his remarks.
Director, Professor Sailesh Nayak, Ambassador P.S. Raghavan, dear friends. First of all, let me say what a really a great pleasure it is to be back at NIAS. Before I entered the room, I went and saw the plant that I planted 5 years ago. I didn't realize it had been so long. The plant has grown. I'm not sure I have, I really look forward very much to today's interaction, and particularly because it's not only the NIAS faculties to researchers, students that I'm meeting, but also because by now you have evolved a larger international studies network, and I really compliment you for that. Let me get down straight away to business and start with the topic, 8 years of national security. So I'd like to explain to you why did I pick that topic, 8 years of national security. Because these 8 years actually, you could argue there have been a number of achievements by the government under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi. Many of those achievements are achievements you see every day. You saw it in a way in the manner in which we met the COVID challenge. You can see it in terms of today how much more and differently development has unfolded. It could be in terms of infrastructure, in terms of electricity connection, water connection, housing programs the government does, the cooking gas programs, the skill initiative that they have, the girls' education initiative that they have. So there are, when you actually look at these 8 years, I could have actually pretty much picked one of about 100 subjects and said, okay, I'd like to talk to you about that today. But I chose national security, and I was very conscious of it. I didn't choose foreign policy, okay? I chose national security. And I chose national security because I feel that very often as a country, as a society, we take it for granted. And we take it for granted if you actually think what national security means. I look at it in terms of the well-being of the country and the society, in terms of protecting against the vulnerabilities that we may face, and in a sense, on a positive way, to enhance our competitiveness. So if those are really the goals of our national security, and I again underline the point that I believe that national security is the foundation really for any development and progress of a society. I want you to think for a moment at 4 challenges that we have all been through in the last few years. The challenge of COVID, and they all happen, by the way, at the same proximate timeline. The challenge of COVID, the challenge of what is happening in our northern borders vis-a-vis China, the challenge of what happened in Afghanistan, the outcome and what implications it has, and now the challenges of the Ukraine conflict and its global repercussions and how that is impacting our lives. And I want you to think that the decisions we made, the courses of action that we chose, the outcomes that resulted, how much different your lives would have been and my life would have been had we done something else. So when I make this point that national security is something which we take as other people do it, it is done somewhere, the point I wish to drive home is it's real, it impacts you, as Ambassador Raghavan said, every day in a more globalized world, the external world impacts us more and more, and I want you to be very conscious of it. And where I am concerned as the External Affairs Minister, obviously the point which I will be making to you is how much diplomacy directly contributes to national security. Now the next question which I ask myself and which I know would be of interest to you is you will ask me, why Bangalore? Why have you come with this thought to Bangalore. And my most honest answer to you is, one great virtue of Bangalore is it is out of Delhi. So that itself is a reason to come out. But that's not the only virtue. So I also, we want to, from on part of the government, to send out the message that all of you are stakeholders in national security and everything associated with it. So it should not, national security should not be a debate in Delhi, for Delhi, by Delhi. In the Ministry of External Affairs some years ago, we set up something called the States Division. Typically in bureaucracy, what happens, people say, okay, States Division means you must be dealing with correspondence involving, state governments. Yes, we do. But we wanted to send home the message that we actually want to democratize foreign policy, because when you actually are in different parts of India, and that is something, when I go out to different corners of India, I feel that how you perceive the world also depends on which part of India you are in. Your priorities adjust to that accordingly. But the third reason why I wanted to come and speak in Bangalore and in NIAS specifically was, I do think that Bangalore, specifically Bengaluru and Karnataka, it is today, no disrespect intended to anybody else, and I'm neither representing the state nor am I my origins lie in it. So it's a very objective statement. I think this is really one of the most progressive states in India, and certainly Bengaluru is one of the most, not only one of the most progressive cities, it actually to the rest of the world is like a poster child of Indian modernity. And I felt in such an arena, it is very important to understand what national security is about. And of course, you are all super connected. So, therefore, you should really know what the external world means. So, the second message I have to you is, when you think, first of all, don't make assumptions. Be aware of national security. Number two, think of national security as a whole of a society, whole of a nation enterprise, because I think a lot of, our history and our future will depend really on how strong that whole of the nation feeling is. There's always a debate on this unity, diversity, balance. My sense of history is that where our sense of unity has been very strong, India has always done well, and certainly that is the direction this government would like to go. Now, I have also a particular word for students of international relations. Ambassador Raghavan and I discussed it briefly a little while ago. I studied international relations too. And one of the challenges when you look at actual situations is you try to force fit what you study onto real life. That you look at real life situations and you say, yes, but this doesn't match what I was taught or what I was learned. So one advice as a practitioner of international studies, having studied it, is it's important for concepts really to grow with life, to learn from life, to learn from practice. And I'm sure your analysis of international relations would be more accurate, much richer, more nuanced if you actually took the complexities of life into your calculations. So let me come to this point. Why did I choose the word national security, the term national security, rather than foreign policy or diplomacy? Because my sense is, even today, many of us, when we think of national security, we have an imagery of, a soldier guarding our borders, or maybe a policeman, a black cat kind of policeman, special forces dealing with the terrorists. So we associate it with a very old-fashioned, limited, hard security kind of thinking. Maybe, as you grow, as you kind of think bigger. People sometimes look at nuclear issues and say, okay, that is national security. But again, I want you to reflect on national security through the lens of those 4 challenges, the challenges which have happened in the last 2 years, in the time since I was last in NIAS. And think of what the national security implications of those are. Let's take COVID, okay? We were able to produce made in India vaccines in a large way. We were even able to produce an invented in India vaccine, which by the way I had in my arm, as did the Prime Minister. We were able to produce, we were not just able to make it in India and invent it in India, we were also able to inject it in India, because let me tell you, a lot of countries struggled actually with the process of vaccinating the people. So we were able to get a kind of vaccination drive done in a very, very successful way. So I just think for a moment, what would have happened if this was not the case? Had our ability to produce vaccines not been as good as it was, if our turn in the queue, so to speak, came later, which by the way has happened to many countries, what would have been the consequences for our societal fabric and therefore for our national security? Had we not been able to produce the outcomes that we did during the time of COVID, I want you to reflect on it. But before we even got to vaccination, we saw another aspect of national security. You know, in a way for 2020 and 2021, I can say, yes, I was the Minister of External Affairs, but I was also, like some of my other colleagues who were in a COVID group, we were all also ministers of COVID affairs, that a lot of our time went in contributing to a larger national purpose under the Prime Minister's leadership on how do we respond to the COVID. And we scrambled in 2020. You know, we were looking for masks, we were looking for PPEs, we were looking for ventilators, we were looking for medicines, we were looking for APIs to make the medicines. And you asked yourself, is it not dangerous for our national security that we are so dependent on external sources, and that this belief that there is a just-in-time economy which will deliver smoothly every day, 24/7, 365 days a year, the COVID told us that was not the case. So when we think national security, certainly from the COVID, no question, we now think health security. But I now ask you, should we not be thinking manufacturing security? And in a sense connected with it, employment security. And have we not slid into a kind of a comfort level where we feel we will get things from the world, you know, we will fit it in our top lines, we will post our 8% growth, you know, companies will do well, but actually we are not developing the deep strengths, we are not developing the supply chains within the country, so that in a moment of crisis, we were not left as vulnerable as we were in those years. Let me move to another issue which also happened at this time, which was the Chinese massing forces and unilaterally trying to change the status quo on the line of actual control in the Ladakh sector. Now, here again, when we think, look back over these last 2 years, we've actually had Indian forces deployed there under very, very, probably the toughest conditions that you can find anywhere on this planet, in very large numbers, who are standing their ground, and in that sense, ensuring that national security is achieved. Now, what is the enabler to do that? The enabler to do that today, if they were able to do it today, and you have to understand the scale of really what has happened in the last 2 years. If you look at the deployment of forces in that sector, it is actually the biggest deployment probably we have done since the 1962 war. So the idea that so many troops could go there and be maintained there logistically over 2 winters now has been because of the infrastructure progress that we have made. In fact, it is the fact that in the border areas, the speed of our infrastructure development has been 2 to 3 times of what it used to be before in the last 8 years. That is really what has enabled our troops to be deployed out there. So again, when you think national security, a road that we build, our ability to make tunnels, to build bridges, these are also very much a part of our national security. I mean, without the appropriate infrastructure, and if there are actually efforts at delaying or derailing the building of infrastructure, especially in border areas, you should ask yourself, is that not a weakening of your national security? So, and it isn't, I mean, I'm citing to you infrastructure, but it's also a case where actually diplomacy was very much in evidence, that our ability to access the right kind of equipment for troops to stay there in the winter was also a contribution to national security. So let me move to the third issue, which was Afghanistan. Now, we saw what happened on August 15th last year, and the impact it had on radicalization across a much larger area. Now, I'm not specifically saying something necessarily out of Afghanistan is going to in some way negatively impact us. It could, it need not also. But it tells you the power of ideas. It tells you today how ideas in a connected world, in a much more literally networked world, have actually, there were times when you would say somebody has to go somewhere to get radicalized. Today you hear this word self-radicalized people, and some of what happened in Sri Lanka, for example, some very violent actions were done by self-radicalized people. So the power today of ideas, of radical ideas, often violent ideas, traveling without physical travel, actually changes your entire concept of national security. So physical barriers and controls are no longer a sufficient defense. They still have their place, but they are no longer sufficient. And finally, let me draw your attention to the implications of the situation in Ukraine, the conflict there. For a large part of the world, including us, today it shows up in what we call a 3F crisis: fuel, food, and fertilizers. That these three, prices of these three have gone up. They have a very significant inflationary impact. In the case of food, they will actually lead to hunger situations. In the case of fertilizer, it will create a cascading problem down the road. So the next harvest in many countries are going to be endangered. So it tells you again how something far away has actually a direct implication on our well-being. In some cases, how it increases our vulnerability. And as I said, it could even actually impact our competitiveness. So I want you to really imagine national security as something not country borders and beyond the borders. This is the entire world actually which can today come to your home in different ways. It can come as a virus, it can come as a cost of petrol, it can come as a shortage of food, it can be a problem with fertilizers, it can come as a radical idea in your neighborhood, or it is something which could come because in your country the system was not geared to give the right responses when it was being threatened from outside. So what is the answer? The answer, obviously, since it is so comprehensive, is the concept of comprehensive national power. Many of you know it, understand it. And I want you to appreciate that in this 8 years of the Modi government, what we have tried to do is actually to build India comprehensively. When I told you at the start that there were many things I could talk about: girls' education, skills India, digital India, Swachh Bharat. Each one of them is a dot. I want you to connect these dots. If you connect these dots, you will realize that there is actually a holistic vision, integrated vision of what our comprehensive national power should be. And that comprehensive national power, first of all, is dependent on improving the quality of human resources. It's a very people-centric approach. And in a way, in international relations parlance, I can say, if we are successful in implementing our sustainable development goals by the end of this decade, I can tell you we will revolutionize India. That you will see immediately, already we have seen, even in these 8 years, we have seen a big change in the gender ratio in India. It's a very remarkable change. There are other societies which have really struggled to change the direction in which that gender ratio has been moving. And the fact that we've actually been able to make that much progress is not a small achievement. But there are other areas. I mean, if you today look, for us today, it could be nutrition, it could be education, it could be health access, it could be school admission, school retention, skills, employability, innovation. As you go up the ladder, every bit matters. So when you hear of programs which are done by the government, if you look at the scale of these programs, many of these programs are actually bigger than populations of entire continents, leave alone countries. So it's when I say of the things we take for granted, I think you all also must appreciate in the last 8 years, things, really transformational things have been happening around you. And if you connect up the dots of this, you will understand the scale of that transformation. So where does diplomacy fit in all of this? Diplomacy, first of all, for any system or any society, creates awareness. Tells you, okay, these are the dangers in the world, these are the opportunities in the world. When you start to employ it, idea is obviously you leverage it, you try and get things from the world, technology, capital, best practices, collaborations. It helps to build relationships because often, like we do as human beings, when you get into trouble or when you want things, those with whom you have better relations are more responsive than others. It's a very essential part of communication because we are actually dealing with a cross-cultural world where what I say is not necessarily what you may hear or understand. And at the same time, it also, in a way, messages intent, it messages capabilities. It has a deterring effect because where there are challenges, diplomacy sometimes can very clearly radiate the message saying, don't do it. And that's, as you can understand, a message which is often sent by us to our Western neighbor. Or sometimes diplomacy can be a preventive. It can head off problems. Or when problems happen, it can even be a solution finder. So when you think in orthodox terms of, national security and a soldier, I put it to you, the diplomacy in a way stands before the soldier, but it also stands behind the soldier. So it tries to head off situations where a soldier will be needed, but if a soldier is needed, it is also fully supportive of the soldier and make sure that the soldier is successful in the execution of what he is being given to do. So what has been the last 8-year record? And I'll just very quickly sum it up because I want to keep more time for the Q&As. I think if you look at the more obvious issues, it's a record which has been very firm. It's been a very steady record. When it comes to a perennial challenge, which is Pakistan and their sponsorship of cross-border terrorism, I think you've seen a degree of clarity that we will not be brought to the table by the pressure of cross-border terrorism. And when that has crossed limits, I think you've also seen responses, as in the case of Uri and Balakot. Where China is concerned, as I said, we are again very clear that we will not allow the line of actual control to be changed unilaterally and in violation of understandings that we have. And therefore, we will stand our ground very strongly. We will, while standing our ground, also engage the Chinese so that where the deployments are particularly dangerous, we at least find a way of de-frictionalizing that in a way. One very, I would say, important achievement of these 8 years was actually the land boundary agreement with Bangladesh. It's had an enormous impact on the India-Bangladesh relationship. It has really opened up huge possibilities for Bangladesh, for all our northeastern states. So our ability today to move goods, have people travel, to supply electricity, power, energy, all that has really, and it's shown up in trade figures. But it is also, what it has done is it's created a much more peaceful Northeast. Elements who previously thought they could get shelter there obviously don't anymore. Similarly, where Myanmar is concerned, again, we've had a foreign policy that has engaged the regime and made it very difficult for Indian insurgent groups to operate there. On a different front, the oceanic front, there's actually been, again, a sea change, if you'll pardon the pun, in thinking. You can see today from the days when we sort of were very hands-off even with very immediate neighbors like Sri Lanka. Today you can see how much more integrated our view is of what we call a Sagar policy. With the big powers, I think we have been quite successful in engaging all of them and ensuring that our national interest is best served. It can be done in new forms of engagement, like you can see unfolding in the case of the Quad. In fact, now not one, but we have an emerging grouping of four countries on the West as well. But also in situations like Ukraine, where we have been very clear-eyed about what the issues are and what our interests are, and how do we strike a proper balance between that. We've also developed a sense of an extended neighborhood, which is the Southeast Asia, that was already developing from the 1990s, but we have taken it further, but now much more towards the Gulf and towards Central Asia. In a sense, you could say this was our neighborhood of pre-partition India, of you can say civilizational India. So I think today that is very much underway. In an area which should be of particular interest to NIAS, if you look at the technology world, again, there's much more activity. You actually have a government which certainly looks at space-based challenges and cyber challenges much more seriously and much more effectively. And at the same time, we have joined regimes like MTCR and Vasanar and Australia Group. And there is a sense today that technology should be very much at the heart of our engagement with the world. We've also tried to influence the big global debates, both through negotiations and through initiatives like the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. And as a society, we have actually tried now, and I would say with some degree of success here, I would say the right word would be perhaps to enhance the India branding. That on the world stage, the idea of a civilizational state with old culture and heritage, which has a lot to contribute, and this can happen, in terms of International Day of Yoga or traditional medicine, Ayurveda, or it can happen even in debates on democracy. So that sense that there is a almost, I would say, a kind of eternal India out there which today has great value for the world. And in my view, there is also an X factor, which is that if, as someone who really goes to a lot of international events and spends time with leaderships of other countries, very honestly, I would say to you, in these 8 years, our stock has gone up, and among the reasons for that is all you have to do is to look at a television screen and see what the Prime Minister is doing. So the point I would conclude with is that the next time you think about international relations, think about politics, analyze, diligence, understanding, all of that is important. But also give weight to a vision, the ability to deliver on it, and to have a decisive leadership which makes all of that possible. Because I believe that in the last 8 years, all of us, you, me, our dear ones, our near ones, are far more secure and safe. And I certainly am confident that that will be the direction in which the government will continue to go. So thank you once again for your attention, and I'll be very happy to take questions.